Good evening. Welcome to This is Revolution podcast. I am Pascal Robert, and I will be your host for this evening because our normal host, Jason Miles, is taking a bit of a break and having a night to himself. I will be here tonight with our guest and our producer, Jean Bajlan, as well. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the war for Red America. We'll be discussing about organizing strategy in the red states, particularly the Ozarks, with our guests from the very well-known podcast, Hoot and Holler podcast, who are leftists in the red states, particularly in the Ozarks, who are trying to expand the Overton window, politically and otherwise, into that particular location. So, also some other announcements for those that you do not know. Tomorrow we'll be having the Mau Mau Hour at, I believe, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be talking about the politics of redemption and racial vindicationism. That will be in the Patreon section and then later on posted publicly on our YouTube page. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the page, become a patron. Check out our website for the merchandise as well, and become a regular visitor to our YouTube channel. Also, or our large assortment of audio only podcasts. But for now, we will go to our intro video, The War for Red America.
Race theory urges intolerance of all human beings that have been created in the image of God.
I do not agree with teaching children how to feel about things. That is called indoctrination.
I'll be damned if I will allow a Marxist revolution to take place in this country, and we need to reject our children even being taught it.
Want a bill banning signature verification. What's that all about? You know what it's about? Fraud. That's what they want, fraud. They want to try and steal this election, because frankly, it's the only way they can win the election.
Donald Trump has been, at least temporarily, defeated. Yet, as the events of January 6th have demonstrated, his followers are far from being broken. Indeed, many still cling on the belief that the 2020 presidential election was stolen by a cabal of Democratic operatives and the Republican collaborators. In response to their failures on a national level, Trump Republicans, including Trump advisor Steve Bannon, are waging a war on those they deem to have sold out their leader. This has been manifested in a renewed effort at grassroots organizing across small-town America. The front lines of this conflict are electoral precinct officers, town councils, law enforcement, and school boards. How is this conflict playing out in small-town America? What are the political battle lines being drawn with Republican-dominated regions? And what does this mean for the left? We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
If we just focus on this, I happen to believe that we will lose less than net 15 seats. He will hold the House of Representatives, will pick up 2 or 3 seats in the Senate, and he'll have even more impetus post this in 2020. Only point I'm making to the grassroots and to the Republicans is that, hey, we've got just as much potential enthusiasm out there. We just have to focus. Now look, if you look at what President Trump's doing, from his actions he's delivering, and if you look at how he's campaigning, if you look at these speeches, every speech he's saying right now, it's a national referendum on me. He's saying Nancy Pelosi intends to impeach me, and we all have to come together. The biggest hurdle we have to overcome is that so many of the deplorables, so many of the grassroots are so anti-establishment, they look at some of these congressmen and they go, why do I have to go out and vote for a rhino? Why do I have to walk a district for a guy who's a moderate who doesn't love President Trump?
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to
Well, all right. Hopefully, you enjoyed our intro video. So, let us introduce our guest. Pat Squash is an artist, welder, mutual aid organizer, and semi professional political busybody who has been living in the Ozarks since he was 11 years old. His podcast, Hoot and Holler, is a podcast about national and local politics, news, religion, and culture in the Ozarks region of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, sometimes Kansas, and never Illinois. Along with co-hosts Taylor Hearn, Joshua Arnett, Harvey Day, the four leftist Ozarkers with various political and religious upbringings try to make sense of the world through the culture and historical lens of their quixotic geographical regions. Please welcome to This is Revolution, Pat Squash.
Pascal, great to be here. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you for coming on, comrade. So, of course, we cannot forget our co-host for today, since I'm acting host, the man from Springfield, professor at Missouri State, our favorite professor at Missouri State, Gene Bajlan.
Thank you, guys. Great to have you here, Pat. Great to see you, Pascal.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So, Pat, since you came here on This is Revolution podcast, and we know what it's like and the need to market a podcast when you're on someone else's podcast, we're going to give you this moment before we start our deep dish dive of questions to tell us what Hoot and Holler is about, what's the political orientation or tendency, and what are you trying to achieve with your podcast, and put it in the context of the Ozarks, what the Ozarks are and represent as well for us, if you can.
Sure, absolutely. So we are I would just call us broadly leftist. I consider myself a small c communist. My tendency is ornery. So we're just four folks who've always been politically engaged and don't really have any background in media or politics, and decided that we wanted to do a podcast where we get the opportunity to talk to each other and meet leftists and other, nooks and crannies of the region that we otherwise might not be able to. And by that metric, I would say so far the podcast has been a success. We just reached a year, and we talk about everything from the war within the Republican Party here in Missouri and down in Arkansas to our most recent episode was on the Precious Moments Chapel and figurine brand out of Carthage, Missouri. So we cover a broad range of topics.
Excellent. So can you explain for our audience, define the Ozarks, what they mean culturally, geographically, historically? What exactly does that part of the world represent in that which is all Americana?
Well, that is the $1 million question. You ask any Ozarker that question, you will get a different answer. It can be defined culturally, it can be defined geographically, it can be defined geologically. But the simple heuristic I kind of use as far as like all of it goes is Appalachia Minor. Think of all of your stereotypes about Appalachia, and you're most of the way there on a lot of things. And that's in part because historically this area was heavily settled to the extent that it was settled in the 1830s by white Europeans who were mostly English, Scotch, and Irish, all basically folks that had been in Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, and the Appalachian Hills for 2 or 3 generations and found their way even further west. They say about the Ozark dialect that the old Ozark dialect, at least, is that it was basically the King's English pre-Rhotic shift. So people were speaking basically 17th century English in the Ozarks all the way into the 1930s and 40s. So it's a very isolated area. It has long been isolated. Gene and I sit here in Springfield, which is about 500,000 metro, about just shy of 200,000 city proper. But the rest of the region is very sparsely populated. It's very rural, And there are areas where, internet reception isn't possible. There are areas that aren't accessed by paved roads to this day. I think the last place to get electricity in the Ozarks was something like 1968 or something like that. I mean, this is just a kind of forgotten part of America. And so as a result of all of that, you kind of have this like platonic ideal of American individualism as kind of the baseline for this area. And that kind of underlies all the politics, I think, probably in a more pronounced way than you would find in Republican politics elsewhere, because you still get a lot of the, verging on fascist stuff and outright fascist stuff coming from like elected Republicans. But there is always this kind of like, we have to do it our own way. We have to, this kind of a sense of a endemic kind of culture maintains, despite the fact that rural culture across the board in the United States is largely being flattened and turned into some kind of like mass produced consumerist thing. I mean, you look at NASCAR, look at Larry the Cable Guy, things like that. I mean, you're dressing up the trappings of the hillbilly, the redneck, and selling it back to that person as kind of a joke about it. and that has become like this kind of flattened. You listen to country music, there's no distinction in the regional styles anymore, generally speaking. It's just like mass culture has come to rural areas, whereas the Ozarks still clings a little bit on to its endemic, long-standing kind of isolated culture.
And I should also add to that, when Nashville was coming up in back in the day, when Nashville was the center of country music, Springfield, Missouri was a rival center, which was ultimately defeated in that. And one other thing I would probably add is, one of the things about modern culture is also the complete obfuscation of the radical political traditions that exist in this part of the state as well. Complete obfuscation that some of the most left-wing elements of the New Deal coalition came from Springfield, Missouri, and the region around here.
Militant strikes completely erased from history. Hell, in 1970, in the early 1970s, during a Teamster strike, a Teamster tried to shoot out the engine block on a truck that was coming down what is now I-44. Well, it turns out it was a dynamite truck and blew up the dynamite truck, vaporized the scab driver, left like a 30-40 foot crater in the middle of the road. And I didn't learn about that until like 2 months ago. And you're interested in this, I read about labor history,
So, Pat, let me ask you two questions. One, can you give us a socioeconomic breakdown of the Ozarks? Class, income, what kind of jobs folks have? And this might be a kind of loaded question. What are the racial politics of the Ozarks like in general as well? Can we get, if there are any racial politics, are there Black communities in the Ozarks? Can we hear a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, starting with like the class breakdown, generally across the board, across the Ozarks, especially in the rural areas more pronounced, you see significant levels above the federal poverty level. In this city, in Springfield, it's something like 60% renters versus homeowners. And of course, our representative government doesn't reflect that at all. So yeah, poverty is persistent in an area like this, and wages remain largely low, though they have responded to like supply pressures recently and have started creeping up. But as far as racial politics go, that is a fraught question for the Ozarks. I mean, Springfield is, I believe, 5% Black in 2021, which is exceptionally low for a city of its size and its geographic place. Like the planter class in the in Missouri was largely concentrated to the north of us along the Missouri and Mississippi River valleys. So the Ozarks didn't have quite, despite being a slave state, didn't have quite the enslaved population that the rest of the state did, which kind of made it into this. There's actually a recent book that I've just picked up and haven't really got into yet called White Man's Heaven. the reason Springfield is 5% black is largely because of a race riot in the early 20th century, like so many communities throughout the South.
Well, I do have to say something on that. So yes, there's the race riot in the early 20th century was a part of it, although historians have the sociologists who came up with the numbers actually kind of exaggerated the outflow of black people from the town. The reality was it was more of an issue of, like the place was not open to black immigration. If you talk to our good friend Marlon Barber, he will tell who lives in Springfield, but he's from the Boot Heel and he's black. Marlon's a professor at Missouri State, right? So, but he's been on the show before, and he'll tell you, like amongst black people, they know this part of the state, be a little bit careful. Springfield might be okay, but Joplin, the places around here, there's a little bit of a strange racial politics. And the history of the region, although it was pro-union, it was more like somewhere like West Virginia or Tennessee, where the anti-slavery sentiment was based on the economics of slavery and not anything to do with sort of black emancipation. You had small hill farmers who were like, we don't like competing with these big slave plantations, which are pushing us out of business. So there's like kind of interesting history behind that. There's one of my colleagues, Brooks Blevins, writes a lot about this, and there's a few other historians at MS. Oh, you got Brooks.
Yeah,
Brooks is he's one of the nicest guys in the world.
Premier Ozarksologist. I mean, he is really the guy to go to on issues like that. Yeah, it's. I mean, this area saw the county that I grew up in was sundown until 1958 or something like that.
Wow,
1960.
Let's put the context of what a sundown town is for our audience. These are basically geographical locations throughout the United States, largely in the South, some in the Midwest, where after a certain period of time, particularly when the sun is going down, it's getting dark, black people were known to basically evacuate the geographic area or face consequences for their presence being there.
Correct. Yeah. And then that was county-wide, and the county adjacent as well, Stone County, were both sundown well into the 20th century. This place attracts a lot of great people, and the demographics have been shifting greatly over the last, especially about 25 years. Especially in a place like Branson, south of here, that's a big tourist destination for conservatives. It has had fundamental demographic shifts in the last 25, 30 years. But it's a bad place oftentimes to be a person of color. Springfield, usually safe, but there's a reason that the NCAA or the NAACP issued a statewide travel advisory for the state of Missouri, and I think it was 2017. I mean, this place, there are some vile people here.
Wow. Well, Pat Squash is the name. Someone asked, what's the name of the guest? Pat Squash. I appreciate the transparency on that answer. Someone asked a question in the super chat. If you can answer, to what extent, if any, did the populist movement of the late 19th century exist in the Ozarks region? That's a very good question.
This is kind of a blank spot for me. I have a pretty good grip on like Civil War to the 1880s, but you get into like the 1890s and more the Bull Moose stuff, and I'm not really sure what was going on down here. I do know that Jacksonianism was hot in Missouri. And in 1832, his second election, he won 100% of the votes in the state of Missouri. My home county, Taney County, is named after Roger B. Taney, who, when it was named, had not yet ruled on the Dred Scott case. Thus, the county seat there is named after John Forsyth, who was the Secretary of State for Jackson, and all of the streets in town are named after Jackson cabinet members. So, I mean, it was formed in the last year of his presidency. I mean, with the Indian Expulsion Act, I think people around this area really loved the racial politics of Andrew Jackson. So I can tell you pretty confidently about, early 19th century populism, but not late 20th century populism.
By the way, special note, I think that one of the subjects that we need to cover on the show at another time is the populist movement of the late 19th century. Gene, put that in the mental footnote. We should definitely try to get a
Certainly.
guest to come on the show to talk about the populist movement. It's a very important movement that is highly, highly underappreciated in terms of American radical left political history. Also a multicultural and multiracial movement as well. But going back to you, Pat, and your show. So we're really going to have a lot to ask you about. What does it mean to be a small C communist in what I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of big time Trump country? Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, I would say this
Categorizing?
is big time Trump country. Trump won Greene County by something like 35 points, 40 points.
And that was the most, and that's the most progressive place in Southwest Missouri.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, this is when I have students who come from out of town, like I had a great student from out of town. He's like, well, this is my first time in the big city. And he was like, and that's Springfield to him. And it's like, it's very liberal here. And I was like, I mean, I guess compared to where you are. So like, just so that people realize this is a bastion of Trumpism. And it's like the most liberal place in the region.
Yeah. We have, 4 universities, and 2 of them, like, Missouri State, large state school, and Drury, which is a liberal arts school that attracts a lot of both progressive kids and progressive faculty. And yet, Springfield remains solidly red. I mean, 6 out of 8 of our state reps are Republican. Every county-wide official is Republican. Both of our state senators are Republican. Our congressman is Republican, and everybody at the state level, except for our auditor, is a Republican.
Wow.
And Springfield does have one Democrat who, interestingly enough, was a Sanders supporting Democrat, which is Crystal Quaid, who's, I think she's now she's the minority leader in the
minority leader.
She's minority leader, but she was a Sanders orientated Democrat.
So, Pat, explain for us, being that you are in this kind of political environment, deep red state, deep Trump country, what is the kind of reception that your podcast message has in this area? And what exactly do you see is the possibility for opening people who are so adherent to the Trump message to a more progressive left social democracy type politics? Also, you might want to add what radicalized you in bringing you to that type of politics as well.
Sure. Well, I grew up like in a pretty liberal household. Both of my parents are professors. My mom actually taught at Missouri State for a while. Traveled a lot as a kid. I was just kind of like a liberal through high school and into my early 20s. But I got into anti-war movement in my teens, and that started to move my politics more solidly into left spaces. And I spent some time hitchhiking around in my 20s and have been working in metal shops. And so just over the years, I've just gone further and further left with every slight from every boss, every landlord, every governmental policy, has just pushed me a little bit further left. So as far as how it plays, I guess, I would say that our podcast really has had some success with engaging with liberals more than with like right wingers. I think the right wingers who are aware of us just generally don't like us, think we're going to destroy the world or whatever. But we get left ideas, like pretty radical ideas, in front of liberal audiences around here, because they simply have no other, there's nothing else. There's 2 talk radio stations in town that play 24/7 conservative talk radio, and liberals don't have a outlet to consume any kind of political media that's local political media that's not just the newspaper. But as far as reaching like Republicans and like Trump country people, a kind of like the lumpenized proletariat, we're finding that like engaging directly in mutual aid is a great way to approach people, meeting people where they're at and meeting their needs, and then getting to talk about like people first politics and working class power and building from there.
Now that's a really interesting kind of experiential base right there. Talk to us about the mutual aid that you do and how you found mutual aid projects to be a organizing vehicle to try to expand the politics of people in this particularly conservative area. I'd really like to hear about that.
Sure. First, I can't take any credit. I have to give all credit to my Southwest Missouri Solidarity Network. If these people hadn't stuck around, if we hadn't, pushed through some hard times, like this thing would have fallen apart. And here we are, like a year later, and we've been doing a weekly event serving houseless people, and we've now started doing monthly brake light repair clinics and stuff. And it's I can't say how grateful I am for this group and for the way that we work together. And so what we did is we found a coalition between local left organizations. So there's a DSA presence in Springfield. There's a Socialist Rifle Association. There's the Food Not Bombs folks who have been feeding folks, and there's the Party of Socialism and Liberation. And we were all kind of looking to do something materially locally, and but organizing a small group into like action can sometimes be very difficult, getting the bodies that you needed. And so we decided to put aside any kind of sectarian issues that we have and do first things first, like survival and community focused programming that brings together everyone from, market socialists, soc Dems, to Maoists and Marxist Leninists, all working together weekly to help meet people's needs. And I think we've, I can't say that we've turned anybody into a communist, but I think we have built some goodwill amongst the community, and we're gonna. I don't know. It's helpful to be able to have those positive experiences and to get these ideas in front of people. And of course, we get some pushback, but also to get like levels of recognition. Excuse me. Get them to participate, get them to engage. And we've had great conversations with people who will be forthright with us that they don't believe with us at all from the outset. And then we end up agreeing on 25 things over the course of a 15-20 minute conversation. So I think it's a good doorway.
I would guess that your first pitch is not, hey, I'm a communist, you want to be one too. I'm sure you start talking about the kind of bread and butter issues about politics, about policy, about wouldn't it be better if you actually had, health care that provided you, don't you think it would be better if we had more union jobs, better income, better, higher minimum wage things? I'm sure you guys have a more incremental, very strategic way in which you introduce left or progressive politics to the normies, or maybe you do hit them over the head with the hammer and sickle. I don't know.
It kind of depends. I mean, we're not super in your face with it, but we're not shy about it, and we will get there. I found one of the ways to get a chink in a lot of people's armor to like find the weak spot is to just give them an opportunity to vent about their boss or their landlord, and that is a great way to segue into, and I mean, I'm not going to start quoting Capital at them, but I am going to talk about working class power. I am going to talk about, solidarity, slip in ideas and words and just generally get them. And then when I'm done, especially at the changing brake lights or whatever, I fix your brake light. I've stood there and talked to you for 5 minutes and then might tell you that I'm a socialist and a socialist just changed your brake light or whatever. So
I think this is an important thing that people should. This is what I appreciate about the people I've met on the left in Springfield. I've been pretty out of the game, obviously, with the new baby and COVID going on for the last couple of years. But I appreciate the kind of non-sectarian approach because, as you always say, Pascal, the left doesn't have any power. So this sectarianism is completely meaningless. There's no movement. And what I see in Springfield and places like that, even if it is in a very like small way, is people trying to build coalitions, because before you can even talk about sectarianism, you have to have some power, because there's nothing to fight over. And there have been people on the left, people I respect, like people I respect, like Catherine Liu, who have poo-pooed things like mutual aid as being useful. But I think in the context of like trying to introduce people to socialism, or introduce you have to be able to offer something. You have to be able to show that, yeah, we are also like here to help. In a place like the Ozarks, you're up against these big charities run by churches and things like that. Socialists have to be involved in that kind of game. And petty sectarianism, which I see often in bigger cities and on university campuses, is completely counterproductive, because it leads to just internal navel gazing, where you have a fight over like which capital study group you go to. Whereas in Springfield, there's a kind of rejection of that and a focus on action, because we're all so weak. There's no point, it doesn't matter that you have like the DSA, which I'm a member of, and then, the Party for Socialism, Liberation, and all the other groups you mentioned. We might as well all work together. There's some great people around here. I want to give a shout out to Jim Davis as well, legend of the left.
Yeah,
in Springfield.
He's been holding it down here for a long time.
He's been in every movement that, and if you want to see Jim, check him out on Von Vlog. But I think people really need to take this anti-sectarianism to heart. I mean, and this is something we emphasize.
The normies don't give a damn about your tendency. No one cares about the tendency except the 12 people in the diner who are on the left who want to argue about whether or not, Stalin should have, farted to the left or to the right in 1932. I mean, it's really, really ridiculous the way in which people get into these kind of minutia of ideological, factoids about people who are dead that no one knows or cares about, but we still have to convince people that, capitalism is a problem. Like, let's get over that hurdle first before we want to talk about all of this other kind of idiosyncratic crap that you can feel special about because you mastered like chapter 4, line 3 of Das Kapital. We're in a position right now where we got to have a broader vision, and I applaud you, Pat, for working with all of those various different left tendencies in your particular geographic region and realizing that mutual aid works for you. If it works for you, do it. Some people may say that, well, mutual aid is doing nothing but cutting out the purpose of the state and functioning to provide services. Listen, if the way you're getting the normies, the folks who are not political, to be exposed to the left politics and say, this stuff is actually not that bad, it makes a lot of sense, is doing mutual aid, then try mutual aid. I don't think that we need to be so closed-minded and so ideological to the point where we're not trying to consider options as to how to expand our politics to people who are not used to hearing why they can work for working class folk, regardless of their geographical or racial makeup.
My two responses to the criticism of mutual aid as being a Band-Aid on a bullet hole or whatever is that one, we're learning how to organize. We are people who are doing good while also like we're honing our praxis and reworking our theory. Like this is as much as a testing our metal and building our chops and toolkit as it is like helping folks directly. And two, you have to understand that in a place like Missouri and Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, these places the social safety net has been gutted. It has been torn out. Yes, we're replacing the function of what should be the state, but it's not politically feasible in this moment, in this place, for us to force the state to fill that hole. And so you gotta stop the bleeding somehow. And we're not going to stop the bleeding, but maybe if we put our hands on it and enough folks come along and put their hands on it along with us, we can at least stymie it for a little bit, long enough for us to get our footing and figure out where to go next.
Excellent. Gene, you have anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, no, I just, I kind of wanted to sort of pivot a little bit to talking about some of the political issues that are, shaping Red America. When we think of politics in the United States, we think of the contest between Republicans and Democrats, at a national level, and very much the kind of elan of political discussion over the last 20 years has been this kind of nationalized discourse that's taking place. But I kind of want to move away from that. You know, we talk a lot about, for example, in places like St. Louis or in New York City or in urban centers, the clash between, you know, progressives and establishment Democrats. We talk a lot on this show about the stranglehold on urban politics that the Black political class maintains in many places. And this is all an inter-Democratic Party conflict. But in a place like Springfield in Southwest Missouri more broadly, there's almost a complete hegemony, at least on an organizational level, of the Republican Party. But that, of course, does not mean that political fissures and political divides do not exist within that party. Just as you have just as you have a Black political class in St. Louis, you have a evangelical white political class in Southwest Missouri. So, can you talk a little bit about the dynamics that shape politics, which takes place, electoral politics and governing politics in Missouri, as it's completely dominated by the Republican Party?
Absolutely. So there is absolutely inter-party tension in the Republican Party, obviously across the country, but specifically here in Missouri. And it's kind of interesting how it plays out, because at the local level in Springfield, you have the city council who is like captured by the Chamber of Commerce. Like I think 7 out of 8 council members and the mayor, all endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce Good Governance Committee. They're constantly, Chamber of Commerce, has like 5-6 events a week, various things, and council members are always showing up and hobnobbing. Almost all of them are business owners or work in management at a business. And so, you have this like business class that's in charge, whereas there's this more like Trumpist kind of element that is now pushing at the city level. So it's interesting that we're kind of like governed by the Republican establishment, despite this being very much Trump country. And it's like an old Republican establishment, right? Because the new public Republican establishment has definitely veered in this direction. But this is like, you're talking Bush era stuff. Like our mayor here, Mayor Ken McClure, he was chief of staff for Matt Blunt, a Republican governor, but his opponents call him a communist, a radical leftist anarchist, and they've been calling the Chamber of Commerce communist. So this is kind of like the level of the political discourse here we're dealing with. And so we actually recently had our municipal elections back in April of this year, and the right, these like Trumpist guys, didn't really nationalize the race. I think that was probably their big mistake. If they had come out and been like full on MAGA, like we're 100% against masks, we're 100% against vaccinations, if they had done that back in April or like through March and into April, I think they would have had a better showing. Not to give them any ideas, but they've already got the ideas because they've already made that turn now. But instead, they didn't, and only one of them got on to the board. There was a whole slate of candidates, but they've now decided, we can't do the OPE Midwestern thing. Like, we have to just make a hard right turn and run at these guys from the right and call them all leftists, despite the fact that, the most left guy on city council is probably Mike Schilling, who's like a 75-year-old, like ex-hippie yuppie guy, So
this is really fascinating. Now, let's do a recap here. So what you're telling us is in the Ozarks, in your area, particularly in Springfield, you have the Trumpin right, the MAGA people, the MAGA chuds, if you will, are now going after the traditional old guard of the Republican Party, the Chamber of Commerce, like business roundtable type people, hardcore capitalists who are still right-wing and still reactionary. But because they are not totally down with genuflecting to Trump and all things Trumpism, they are being deemed by the Trumpists as being leftists, Marxists, socialists who are selling out or rhinos or whatever else.
Yeah, that's the one you hear constantly. Rhino.
Would you say the only strength that the Chamber of Commerce Republicans have at the moment is that in a place like Springfield, where there is a significant liberal minority, like it's not small, that they can rally liberals to support them at come election time.
Yeah,
because
that's
they're basically
response.
that's the all they can do is like if they can hold on to enough Republicans and rally the liberals, that's how they maintain power. It's like a fascinating dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the past we've had this kind of like right insurgent candidate before the Trump era. Palin was really kind of like a stepping stone for a lot of that stuff. And the date slips me. I can't remember if it was 2013 or 2015. I believe it was in 2013. City Council had passed a sexual orientation and gender identity non-discrimination clause. They added that to the city Bill of Rights, to the charter, and then it got put on a referendum and repealed. And in that same repeal, they elected a couple of anti-LGBT bigots to the council. And so we've had this kind of like this populist social conservative wave against the more formal, don't rock the boat conservatives of the city or of the Chamber of Commerce. But it's interesting, though, if you look at statewide politics, all of those guys are MAGA, and it's still happening to them, too. So there's a conservative caucus in the Senate, in the state Senate, including two of the guys who are running for Missouri 7th, our Congress seat here, Mike Moon and Eric Burleson. And both of those guys are members of this conservative caucus, and they've been going after Mike Parson, who is just like a Trump guy, not like a particularly like rabid one, but he's just like a dopey Trump guy. And they've been going after him and calling him a lib, and saying that he's equivocating on abortion laws. And so there is this like hard right Christo-fascist thing. And honestly, they agree on like 75%. The distinction in ideology is much more distinct at the city level. Like that one makes sense to me. At the state level, it doesn't really make sense to me, because they agree on like 95% of stuff. It's just they are trying to find a place to put pressure and pry this thing further and further right.
And the kind of the senator, there's a Senate race coming up. They had an old school Republican style senator, Roy Blunt, personal friend of Joe Manchin. If people remember, Joe Manchin basically asked business people to bribe Roy Blunt to support some legislation, but he's bailing because these guys know they will get primaried. So like the former governor, who I like to refer to as a governor alleged sex crime.
You go alleged. I just call him Governor Sex Crimes.
Eric Greitens, right? Eric Greitens is a Jewish gentleman from St. Louis who has a PhD in development from the University of Oxford, whose wife is a professor professor at Mizzou, also studied at the University of Oxford. In fact, many people who overlapped with me there overlapped with his wife. We were at the same college, St. Anthony's College. Total liberal establishment. But he joined the military, and he rebranded himself as this kind of radical Trump guy. He was well known, I think, in 2016 because he had an advertisement in which he was machine gunning things. Very much plays up his role as this thing. So, there's a whole kind of like, let's say, dance or show that these politicians, and I mean, my take, Pat, would be some of these politicians don't believe it, and some of them do believe it, but they all like to have to make the show of being these radical Republicans and these like hardcore cultural warriors. But the divide is actually between those who are like the true believers and those who are the cynical old school Republicans, but who understand the way that the wind is blowing in the Republican Party and realize that the spectacle is what they need to engage in.
And that's what's interesting is I think the two front runners currently in that race, Eric Greitens, former governor, who I will note, actually, he kind of rebranded before he rebranded as a Trump guy. He was like the woke troop. He wrote some books about like some books about war and military service from kind of like a woke kind of perspective. And then he turned into the guy who shot 1,000 rounds out of a minigun in a 30-second ad. Yeah, he was ousted as governor. And then we have our current attorney general, Eric Schmidt, who has been suing the Biden administration, tried to sue China, has been suing just about every single school board or county that tries to enforce a mask mandate in the state. And those two are the front runners. And I think both of them are the cynical guys. Like, I think Eric Schmidt is a more like old school 10, 15 years ago, the compassionate conservative kind of guy. And now he's just going complete like bloodthirsty MAGA. Eric Greitens has gone full QAnon. He is like the QAnon guy. He's endorsed by Wendy Rogers, who was the state senator in Arizona, who was pushing the whole audit thing and is really tied into QAnon. He's endorsed by Michael Flynn. He's endorsed, I believe, by Ron Watkins, who is possibly QAnon. So like, he's just like straight up the QAnon candidate. Both of these guys polling, I think, depending on where you look, in the 30s. But then you have somebody who like Billy Long, who is our current congressman, who is, I think, dyed in the wool, like true believer. Just he's buddies with Trump. He's an auctioneer before he ran for Congress, and so Trump always kept him around to do like the auctioneer bit at parties and stuff. He at one point he had ridden on Air Force One more than any other member of Congress. So I'm kind of interested to see what happens if Trump steps in and says, I endorse Billy Long, who's currently polling at like 3%. I think that could probably put him into the mix, and then you would have like a couple of cynical guys versus an earnest one. But
you also have the guy in St. Louis with the gun
yeah,
guy.
Mark McCloskey. Yeah,
Mark
also
McCloskey.
longtime Democrat. I mean,
long-time
Democrat donor until last summer.
And that's the guy who waved his gun at the Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Him and the Karen lady came out.
And that was the guy with him and his wife who had their shotguns out.
Yep, he's running for Senate on the Republican ticket
as a meme candidate. Yeah,
that's the guy who him and his wife had their guns out.
Yeah,
talking about they were worrying about Black Lives Matter, so he's now running for electoral office.
Right, yeah. And then he was charged, and then the governor pardoned him. Last summer, he was invited to speak. They spoke at CPAC. Or maybe it was early. Yeah, I guess it was last summer, last fall.
They found a home.
Yeah.
So Pat, I want to ask you a question. It seems to me that the actual red meat, excuse the pun with the red, that the right wing are using to feed this Trumpist kind of coup d'etat internally within the Republican Party is really all culture war. It's not really much about policy stuff or allocation of resources or foreign policy. It's really it really seems to be about, stuff like, LGBTQ, critical race theory. We don't want this stuff being taught in our schools. Mask mandates, anti-vax, and abortion. Is that really kind of the mother's milk that's feeding the litmus test for who's a Trumper and who's not?
Yeah, I would say that, and I would also say racial grievance plays into it significantly. You can kind of tell who's really leaning into it by the amount of loaded language they use around, Black Lives Matter, CRT, around immigration. Like some people try to keep it more clinical, and they're kind of try to do the compassionate conservative Bush kind of, still pushing like racial grievance policies and white supremacy, but doing so a little bit more slyly. Whereas now there is a significant move towards it just being like in the open, being cruel and, just abjectly cruel. So,
well, this moves to the segment I want to get to because we're getting low on time, but I wanted to touch on this. As you know, Steve Bannon, former member of the Trump coterie, big time Trump activist who has a very, very well known podcast nationally, has been using a grassroots strategy to mobilize Trump supporting Republicans in red states to displace the same types of Republicans we're talking about who are old guard that have not demonstrated adequate loyalty to the Trump MAGA faction of the party. He's organizing people at the precinct captain level, school boards, municipal county firemen, sheriffs, you name it, whatever. He's getting people to come out in a large scale of numbers. As a matter of fact, there's an article, Gene, if you want to share that article in ProPublica that discusses the Bannon strategy in terms of how he basically is going to fully take over the electoral, educational, and municipal organizing strategy and infrastructure in these states, probably like in the Ozarks, by galvanizing and mobilizing people under really like radical rhetoric, like this is a war and we've got to win. Okay, are you hearing or seeing this kind of strategy in the Ozarks, and are you familiar with how it's playing out? And if so, is there anything that can actually counter this? I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
As I'll start at the end first. I have no idea. I'm trying to figure that out. I have no idea, but I will say, yes, it is absolutely something we have seen here in Missouri, and Springfield has been a little bit lighter. I mean, we haven't had a scene quite yet, like out of that San Diego school board meeting that I believe was in the intro clip with that white guy with dreads screaming till his face is like purple and stuff. But we've had lots of yelling at school board and at city council. We've had lots of evoking stuff that sounds like holy war stuff, with constant evocation of the Holocaust, which is just soft Holocaust denial. They're comparing, starting last summer, they compared it, the mask, being forced to wear a mask inside, as the same as being forced to wear a yellow star. In fact, a woman said that at Springfield City Council last July, and it went around enough that the Auschwitz Memorial decided to say, hey, that's effed up. You can't say that, and explain why that's Holocaust minimization and, in often cases, outright denial. And then it kept happening and happening and happening. And this summer we had like 4 city council meetings in a row where citizens showed up with an actual yellow star taped to their shirt.
And there were big anti-vax protests outside of Mercy Hospital. They had some fellow coming in from Alabama, even, I think.
Yes, yeah, that Christopher Key, vaccine police, roaming around the country accusing people of war crimes and telling them that they're going to be executed under the Nuremberg Code. He, local anti-vax activists brought him to town to speak at a rally, and then he ended up speaking at a school board meeting, and then he ended up coming back a week later and speaking at a city council meeting. And in the meantime, he had cornered several pharmacists at like Walmart and told them, they're violating Nuremberg laws. He tried to serve the CEO of Cox Hospital with papers citing, it was some sovereign citizen crap. But that kind of went totally off the rails there for a while this summer. They're still out almost every single Saturday in front of one or other of the hospitals. The numbers have gone down a little bit, and they're not quite as active at school board and city council right now, but these things are just kind of ebbing and flowing. And as soon as they can find a pressure point that they can leverage for outrage and anger to mobilize people, they always, jump at it. And sometimes it's very successful. Unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a kind of like a vacillation between either one week it's critical race theory. For example, they demanded that teachers at the university hand over their syllabi to see if they're teaching critical race theory and things like that. And then the other week is the anti-vax stuff, and anything like any kind of racial sensitivity discussion is condemned as critical race theory.
Right.
So there's this constant moving between these two targets. When one goes a little bit stale, they seem to push on the other one.
Well, Go ahead,
Pat, I
Pascal.
want to ask you a question because there are a lot of people, and I just want your opinion. I want to put it out there because this is a controversy I see with a lot of people on the left who don't want to use that F word. Do you think that these people actually are have fascist potential? Do you see them as fascists or potential fascists? Do you think it's even relevant to use that phrasing, or either way, it's bad enough one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of them have that potential. I don't want to wade into the debate over like what is or isn't. I feel like far smarter than me, people argued about it for 4 years and didn't come to a conclusion. But I would certainly say that these people have the propensity to do it. And also, like you say, does it really matter what exactly? I mean, I'm more interested in tactics and strategies and where they're at theologically, because there's a lot of theological underpinnings here. We didn't even get into evangelicalism, which is kind of the backbone of this entire movement.
Well, we should certainly touch that in the after hours.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
so that's one thing that you made very clear. The evangelical Christian underpinning is a strong kind of continuous backbone to all of this.
Here's one statistic about the United States that I feel really helps put a lot of the crazy stuff that I see into context. In 2010, Pew put out a study on a number of things, but it was basically kind of like a doom and gloom study, kind of getting an idea of how Americans felt about the apocalypse, et cetera, et cetera. 41% of respondents said that Jesus Christ was going to return by the year 2050. 58% of white evangelical Protestants and over 50% of just white Protestants generally said that Jesus Christ was going to return to earth by 2050. So when you have that baseline of apocalypse, of living at the end of literal history, of being, what matters happens in the next 30 years as long as I ascend to the kingdom of heaven and live eternally, then that really explains a lot of like the stuff that's going on, and a lot of the seeming lack of cognitive dissonance going on in some people's heads.
Fascinating. Well, we're coming up on an hour. Will you be able to join us for some time in our Patreon section on the after hour?
Sure, I can hang out.
Excellent. Gene, so you're going to prepare us for the links to take us to that next era?
I sure will. And so yeah, if you want to catch that, guys, become a patron, and we're gonna get juicy. I think we're gonna talk about evangelicalism. We definitely got to talk a little bit about which is the best buffet in Springfield, the best all-you-can-eat buffet. But yeah, so sign up and come and join us in the fun half. Make sure you all check out Hoot and Holler podcast. You can get it on Apple. You can get it on SoundCloud as well, I think.
SoundCloud, Spotify, pretty much anywhere. You type in Hoot and Holler Pod into Google and see where it takes you.
My favorite thing is that it's Hoot and Holler, whereas Jason, with his correct grammar, wrote it as Hoot and Holler, like a true gentleman. But yeah, so we will be going in the second half, and I guess, Pascal, it's up to you to say we are out.
Yes, and let's not forget tomorrow we have the Mama Hour, 8 p.m. We'll be talking about the politics of redemption and racial vindicationism. I want to thank our guest, Pat, for coming on, and I hope you enjoyed being on our show, Pat, and we'll be thinking about coming back again to talk about a wide variety of things as well.
We need a white person expert.
We need a white person expert? Oh, easy.
Snick ran the White Folks Project in only two places, Biloxi, Mississippi, and Ozark, Arkansas. I am trying to get... If anybody, archivists, if you know anybody that has any information on the White Folks Project run in Ozark, Arkansas in the 1960s,
by Snick,
get at me.
That would be a great subject for a show, by the way, as a matter of fact. But on that note, folks, we are on an hour. We've got to get out of here and get ready for the Patreon section. Gene, get ready for the exit music. Let's go with cartoons, and we are